Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In the last module, we have already discussed the problems of the environmental issues and problems, and in this context we have already discussed the trade-offs as well as the terms, the concepts, and in this context we have taken into account the interdisciplinary sister disciplines like environmental economics, environmental policy, ecological economics. And by taking the microeconomic concepts as well as the welfare economic concepts, we have also talked about the theoretical tools that we have used in explaining the environmental issues and environmental problems. So, having discussed all these in the first module, now we will be talking about the commons and the collective problems by taking into account some seminal theories. So, first of all we will be discussing the typology of the goods that will be helpful in understanding the problems, and then only we can actually explore about what kind of theories that can be applicable for solving these environmental issues. So, in this context broadly our contents would be the typology of the goods, discussing different types of goods. Then we will be discussing what is the collective action problems by again discussing what is the collective action itself and in which context this collective action is applicable. Then we will be discussing about some theoretical aspects, some seminal theories on the collective actions. So, first we will be talking about the Harding thesis of tragedy of the commons. So, it will be followed by the prisoner's dilemma game, and the third one that we will be discussing about the Olson's logic of collective actions and how the group behavior is important in explaining this collective action problems. And lastly, the recent one among all these the collective action problems and theories that we have discussed, that is the Ostrom's governing commons. So, because of which she got the Nobel Prize in 2009. So, having kept these contents in this nutshell, now let us have a look on the typology of the goods that will be helpful in explaining that how the nature of the goods itself is giving rise to the problems of collective actions. So, if you see the economic literature, generally these goods are divided into four parts, four categories, and these goods are categorized based on these two attributes. The first one is non-excludability, this is the first quality, and the second one is non-rivalness. And these two attributes is first of all explained by Musgrave in 1969 article. And based on these attributes, now we can explain what is public goods, what is private goods, what is common goods or collective goods, along with what is the club goods. So, let us talk about this public goods. So, what is the public goods? Generally, the common perception is that the public goods means the goods which are provided by the government or the government agencies or the authority itself, and because of which for the provision of which the audience or the consumers, they do not have to pay anything. So, it is a kind of free of cost. And so far technologically, if you want to define this public goods, then we can say that it must be satisfying these two qualities. The first one is non-excludability and the second one is non-rivalness. So, what is non-excludability and what is non-rivalness, and how these two concepts would be helpful in explaining and defining these public goods. So, if you see this non-excludability, so in a general sense it may mean that if a particular consumer is consuming a good and it is not forbidding the second one or the second consumer to consume the same, then there is no problem. So, it is a case of no excludability, or sometimes we are saying non excludability. So, in this context, if you have to define it, then you can say that this non excludability means the cost of keeping the non payers from enjoying the benefits of the goods and services, which is very high, because of which no one can be excluded from using that particular good. The first thing that we want to highlight, that the cost of this provision of this public good is too high, because of which the first consumer who wishes to consume cannot actually prevent the second consumer to consume the same good. That is why the good is actually open to both of the consumers. And if you see the second characteristics of this public goods, so it is non-rivalness. So, what is non-rivalry in this context? So, in general you can say, in the common parlance you are saying when it is rivalry, that means when one is consuming, then second cannot actually consume the same. That means it is the consumption of the first person will reduce the availability of that particular good for the second person. That is why it is subject to rivalness. And if these two qualities are satisfied for a particular good, then you can say that this is a case of public good. And in this context, by taking into account these two attributes, now we can take some examples, that which one would be the fitting examples to describe the public goods. So, we can take into account in the case of lighthouse or the national defense case, that expenditure that we are incurring on the national defense, or you can say the case about the knowledge itself, spreading knowledge, or the case of the environmental goods like your biodiversity or the national park or the amount of land cover or the fresh air in the atmosphere. So, there are many examples existing for the public good itself. So, why we are saying that these examples or these examples are the examples of the public good itself, because it satisfies these two characteristics. One is your non-excludability criteria and the second one is non-rivalry criteria. If you take into account the lighthouse case, so the lighthouse can direct the military ship as well as the ships which are meant for the private business. Those who are going for fishing in the deep sea, they can also take the advantages from the lighthouse and they get the directions to reach at the destinations. So, it does not actually differentiate whether the ship is a military ship or it is a private ship which actually had gone for fishing in the deep in the oceans. So, in this case, if the first ship, military ship, is accessing and getting the benefit of the lighthouse, the second one is not excluded for getting the benefit at the same time. That is why you can say it satisfies the first criteria of the public good, that is non-excludability. And the second one is, the second criteria is non-rivalryness or non-rivalers. So, how it is also qualifying? The lighthouse case, if you are taking into account, then you will be finding that when the first ship, that is the military ship, is actually taking advantages of getting the directions, then at the same time the second one, that is the private ship which has gone for shipping in the deep in the sea, it can also take the advantages, and the first one is not actually reducing the availability of the lighthouse service for the second one. That is why in this case you can say that this lighthouse actually qualifies both the criteria, then you can say that this is a case of your public good. And for all the examples, rest of the examples, we can actually say that we can actually argue that whether it is qualifying these two criteria or not, and accordingly you can say whether it is a public good, falls under the ambit of public good or not. And if you take into account, and if you actually go into understanding the deeper meaning of the public good, then public good can also be of two types. The first case is the pure public good. So, and the second one is impure public good. So, what is pure public good? That means it strictly qualifies these two qualities. That means the quality and quantity will not be diluted or sacrificed. So, they are perfectly non-rivalrous in consumption and non-excludable. So, we have already taken the case of your lighthouse by explaining that how the lighthouse is qualifying both the qualities strictly. And the second one, if you take into account, then you can say these public goods can be of impure types. That means the particular public good can satisfy these two qualities partially or to some extent. It actually does not fulfill the two conditions fully. So, we can take into account the access to the road. So, as all of you know that this public road is also a public good, because it also satisfies that everyone can get the access and no one can actually exclude you for accessing the same. And the second one is that if you are accessing, then you are not actually preventing the access of the second person or whosoever is desiring to have its travel on that particular road. But however, if you see during the festive occasions in a particular region or regional occasions, or you can say cultural occasions, then in a particular road we can find congestions. That means here in this case we can find, although the public road is a case of public good, but still it is not fulfilling the two criteria, that is your non-excludability and non-rivalrous in a fuller extent. So, that means in this case during the festive occasions, when a vehicular is driving on that particular road and like 10 or 20 people they are also willing to pass through the road, then obviously it will be going to be congested. So, in a particular crowded situation or particular occasions, in this case the access of the first person or the first rider will be preventing or congesting the access to the second person, which is leading to a partial case of rivalness in driving your vehicle on that particular road. That is why it is a case of impure public goods, that means which partially fulfills these two criteria, that is excludability and the second one is non-rivalness. So, the second category of goods that we can understand is the private goods. So, here when you say that private goods, so it is a kind of common goods that we purchase by paying money, right. So, that means here you can to say that a particular consumer is having ownership right or property right because it is paying for the same, right. And in this context, if you are paying for the same and you do have the property right or ownership right, then obviously you are excluding others for using the same, and when you are purchasing it, then obviously it is you only who purchased and it is you only who can enjoy these things. So, that means the second person whosoever is interested to purchase the same, he cannot, because the good is not available to that person, the same good is not available to the person. That is why it is a case of rivalry. And in this case, in case of private goods, it satisfies these two criteria, that is excludability and rivalness, and it does not satisfy the first the criteria like non-excludability and non-rivalness that are applicable to the public goods itself. So, for example, it can take into account any day to day life consumption that we are incurring on, like your consumption of burger, or you can say you have purchased a particular book, let us say map of India, or your shoes or house. So, these are all examples of your private goods. And moreover, the easiest way to find that whether a particular good is a public good or a private good, it depends upon the level of competition for that same good. So, if you take into account the level of competition for the burger here, so that means when you are paying for the burger and you are getting. So, if you see any of these burger parlors, let us say it is a case of your McDonald's, then you will be finding that you are in a queue, right, and when you are trying to purchase, you get the token, and the second person is in queue just behind you, and he is also trying to have its order for the burger itself. That means here there is a huge or high competition for the good, right? And that is why by identifying the level of competition for the good, you can also identify whether the good is a public good or a private good. But if you take into account any public good, let us take the case of fresh air. You get up in the early morning and you just wanted to have fresh air. Then what you are doing? You are actually going for a morning walk. In those areas covered by the trees or open spaces, right? And when your neighbor is also doing the same, so it is not a kind of competition. Rather, you cannot say that competition is happening here, because no one is actually snatching your rights, and you can also equally access the benefits that your neighbor is also trying to see. So, in this context, if you are taking into account any public good, then it is less competitive, whereas if you are taking into account any private good, then you are finding a great competition for the same good. And the second thing is that you need to take into account the possibility of excluding its consumptions. In the first case that we have taken into account, the case of burger, what happened that when you are in the first, you are in the queue and you are in the first one in the queue, and when you order for a burger, what happened? There is a possibility that your order will be excluding the consumption of burger for the second person, right. So, that is how you can actually say that whether it is a case of public good or it is a case of your private good. And just like your public goods, these private goods can be of pure private good and impure private good. And if you see in real life examples, then these pure private goods or pure public goods are the extreme cases. So, in real life we are finding the cases of mixed one. So, if you want to define this pure private goods, then it also have the characteristics of excludability and rivalness, and in case of this impure private goods, then the good will be displaying the qualities of excludability and rivalry to some extent, but not fully. So, in this context, what will be the characteristics? So, it will be like this. In case of this impure private good, so the good would be displaying the characteristics, that is partial excludability and rivalry, or partial excludability or partial rivalry, or both the case, which will be partial one. And the next category of these goods is known as the common goods. Sometimes we are also saying it is the case of the collective goods. So, how to define, how to recognize these goods? So, they do also satisfy by taking into account these two terms, that is excludability and rivalness, that we can also identify, or we can also define that how to say this is whether this is the case of common good or this is the case of the collective goods. So, if you see these two characteristics, then you can say that these common goods or collective goods, they do satisfy the qualities of non-excludability, and they are rival, and they are rival in the sense, to some extent they are rival. So, in this case you may be confused about, sometimes we get confused the common goods with the public goods, but remember that in case of public goods, they satisfy the case of non-excludability and non-rivalness, but here the goods satisfy the first characteristics. This is the similar one, that is non-excludability, but in case of this good, the non-rivalness is not applicable fully. That means here the good is satisfying the case of rival. So, that means here you are saying the rivalry conditions is there, existing to some extent. So, if you take into account some examples, this distinctions will be clear. So, if you take the case of open air, so it is a public good, because when you are using, accessing and you are using for breathing purposes, the second person whosoever is there, he or she is also easily using this oxygen or from open air at that place. So, that means you are not excluding the first person, and the first person is not excluding the second person in accessing the good. So, that is why open air is a case of your public good. But however, when you are saying air and air in a particular case, and that is that we are saying that it is a case of air pollution in a particular locality, then here it will be case of common goods. Why it will be a case of common goods? That means it is rivalry. The conditions of rivalry. Let us say that in a particular region, we are now imagining the case of a local region, maybe your local town or your local cities or your village. Then if there is an industry or any kind of manufacturing units are there, then it is very difficult to have fresh air over there, right. So, in this case, so if you want to consume fresh air, then obviously you have to actually make a retaliations, or the quality of air would be decreasing if the production would be increasing in this particular place, in this particular manufacturing units. So, that is why in this case you are saying that this air in this local region is a case of common goods or a case of collective goods which display the characteristics of non-excludability, and however it is rival. And the other examples can be your fishery or forestry, right. And if you see the case of fishery in a particular area, let us say that fishery in a particular lake, and this particular lake is actually having a definite size, a smaller size, or you can say the case of village pond, fishery in a village pond, then you can say that although it is non-excludable, that means within this community or within this village, everyone can get the access to this fishing. But however, when you are fishing a particular amount, the same amount is diminished for the second person who is also living in your village or in your particular area, and who is also a member in your group. If you take into account, here we are discussing these 4 examples on the common goods and collective goods, and if you are taking into account the first 2, water and air, then you can say it can be polluted given a particular situations. And if you take into account the second and third one, then these 2 common goods can actually be sustainably used if there would be a certain kind of mechanism existing, or there would be, if there would be some kind of arrangements, maybe it is a case of institutional or social norms arrangements, then you can say that this particular thing, particular good can actually be sustainably used. And if there is the presence of any institutional arrangements in providing this particular good sustainably, that means right now you can get the benefits out of it, and right now your neighbor and his neighbor can also get the benefit, and as well your children, future children or offsprings, and your neighbor's future children or their offsprings, they can also get the benefit out of it. Then this is the case of sustainable use. And if there is any kind of sustainable arrangement present over there in case of your common goods, then it is known as the common pool resources. So, common pool resources is a kind of common goods or collective goods. Here the only difference is that this is a subset, this common pool resources is a subset of the common goods or collective goods, and the only thing is that in case of this common pool resources, institutional arrangement is present, but in case of common goods there is no such institutional arrangement, which actually will lead to sustainable use of the resources. And based on the institutional arrangements regarding this common property rights, that who is having right to that particular property or particular good, this common pool resources can be of certain types. So, that means when you are saying that the common property rights is on the national government or the state government or the local government, then it will be a case of your public good. when based on this institutional arrangement and regarding this common property rights, if the common pool resources is owned by let us say a private person or a community, or it is not owned by anyone, then these following kinds of following types of goods can happen. The first case is the common property resource problem or common property resource case, the second one is private resource case, and the third one is open access resource case. So, what is common property resources? So, here we are saying that the common pool resources are owned, governed, managed by a particular communal groups. So, maybe your villagers, a particular village, maybe a particular community, maybe a particular tribe, maybe a particular locality, right. And this, if this is so, that means the property common property rights is based on these groups, then it is a case of your common property resources. And what would the characteristics of this common property resources then? Then obviously when you are saying that this property or this good belong to a particular community, then it is a case of non-excludability within the community. So, that means whosoever would be the member within this community, they can get the access, no one will be excluded. And the second one is that, however, if you see the extraction of resources, if I am a member and you are also a member, I will be trying to use the particular good and you will be trying to use the particular good, then obviously degradations in the good will happen. So, that means whatever I will be consuming, it will actually diminish the availability of that particular resources for you. So, this is a case of rival in consumption. So, the common property resources therefore satisfy these two qualities. The first one is, so it displays the quality of non-excludability within the community, and the second one is it is rival in nature in consumption. So, we have already discussed that what can be the examples of these common property resources. You may think about some other examples existing in your locality. And the second one is that if the ownership is not based on anyone, that means no one is having common property rights on that particular good, then it is a case of open access resource. So, the examples can be the fishery in the oceans or the sea, because sea and open is not actually owned by anyone. So, it is open. So, in this case, if you are talking about this fishery case, then this fishery is a case of open access resources. So, the last of this kind in economic theory, so far the goods classification is concerned, it is the case of the club goods. So, what is club goods? So, that means you are deliberately or you are artificially limiting the goods. So, what can be the characteristics if this is the case that you are artificially limiting the availability or quality or quantity of the goods, then it will be displaying the characteristics of excludability. That means, if you are paying for it or if you qualify certain criteria, then you can get the benefits of that particular good, and if you are not, then obviously you will be excluded from enjoying the particular good. However, this good will be non-rivalrous, because within this particular group, so you can actually consume, and the second person whosoever is interested, he can also consume without the diminishing the availability of the particular good. So, example, this type of good you can also find in our real life examples. So, it can be the case of the toll road. So, why toll road? The newly constructed road, when you are actually the construction is over, then you will be finding a kind of toll tax if you have to use that particular road. So, whosoever is will be paying this toll tax, he will be eligible to ride on that particular road, right? And thereby, and whosoever is not ready to pay this toll tax, obviously he cannot actually use this particular road. So, that means this toll road is excludable in nature. If you are paying the toll tax, you are included, and if you are not paying the toll tax, then obviously you will be excluded. So, and this toll road will be considered as the club goods until we achieve the point of non-congestions. That means, if there is no congestions, so far we will get the point of congestions, then you can say that if I am paying, I will be riding the road, and if Z is not willing to pay the toll tax, then obviously he is not permitted to use the same. Or you can say the case of the cable TV. So, in the 80s and 90s, perhaps you have seen the case of national TVs. So, in national TVs, what happened, that whosoever is having TV and antenna, then he can or she can have the access for this. But what is cable TV? If you are paying this particular amount, then these are the channels available to you, and if you are not paying, so these channels will not be available in your TV. So, this is the case of your club goods. So, accordingly, the typology of this goods we can actually discuss in a nutshell. Take into account the criteria of excludability and your rivalness in consumptions. So, if you see this, if you are talking about this private goods, so what is private goods? If it is satisfying the quality of excludability, that means the private goods are excludable in nature, and simultaneously it also is rivalrous. If you are consuming, then obviously the same amount of good or same good is not available for the second person who is ready to pay and ready to get. So, that is why the private goods, they do have this characteristics of excludability and rivalness. And if you are taking into account the common pool resources, what happens? What would be the characteristics based on these two criteria? So, if you will say that the case of excludability, can we exclude? You cannot actually exclude, because it is non-excludable. So, that if you are member of a particular group, so you are accessing this particular thing, and this your neighbor, he is also a member and he is also accessing these things. So, that means you cannot exclude your neighbor from accessing the particular good. That is why this non-excludability is not applicable. So, it is not excludability is applicable, or excludability is not applicable. And simultaneously, if you see the case of rivalness in consumption, yes, it is rival, it does satisfy the same thing. And in case of public goods, so as you understand that it is non-excludable. So, this excludability criteria is not satisfied, no, and this rivalness criteria is also not satisfied for this public good, right. And if you talk about the last one that we have already discussed, that is the club goods, here it satisfies the quality of the excludability. You can exclude it if you are paying for the toll tax, right, and if you are not paying for the toll tax, and if you are paying, then obviously he is eligible for ride in this road. And so, for rivalrous in consumption is concerned, it is not rivalrous till the point of consumption is reached. So, based on these, now we will be discussing about the collective actions. Here we just will discuss about what is collective action and what is collective action problem. Then we will be discussing the rest of the theories based on this to explain the solutions for the collective action problem in the next lecture. So, let us discuss about this collective actions. That means, here you are saying that for a particular action to be said as collective. So, here these are the kind of actions or the behavior of the individuals in a particular organization or a particular group, and why these behaviors and these actions are targeted for achieving a common purpose, common objectives. So, if your behavior and actions are motivated for achieving a common objectives, then it is known as the collective actions. Then what is a collective action problem? So, there should not be any problem. That means, if a group of persons, they are trying to achieve a common objectives, then and accordingly their behavior or their actions are oriented towards this, then what is the problem? The problem is that no one is ready to cooperate. So, in this context, a collective action problem can be defined as a situation in which all the participating individuals in a particular group, they would be better off if they are ready to cooperate. right. But however, if they do not cooperate, the reality is that they seldom cooperate, because there is a class conflicting interest between their own interests and the interest of the common objective itself. So, this actually led to the evolution and emergence of the theories on collective actions, that how this problem can actually be corrected, or what are the variables and what are the factors responsible for these collective action problems. So, based on this, in our lecture, in this module, we will be discussing these seminal ideas or seminal theories on collective action, the first of the kind, which was propounded by Olsons in 1965, that is the logic of collective actions and group behavior, that we will be discussing in the next class. And apart from these, the second one, that is actually tinting the case of conservation and the management of the commons, which actually raise the questions on this, on the state interventions, and which is actually advocating for the privatization of these commons or common property resources, that is talked about. However, actually wanted to know that what would be the solution for this, whether this state interventions or the privatization is like a panacea for all these problems that we are facing in the collective action problem. It is not. So, that led to this kind of problem, actually led to the evolutions for getting the theories like the case of Eleanor Ostrom's governing the commons by emphasizing on the evolution of the institutions. And based on this, now in the next class we will be discussing that how these three theories are actually having the first kind of ideas, fresh ideas on solving these collective action problems. Apart from this, in order to prove this Hardin's thesis of tragedy of the commons, we will be taking into account the analytical framework of Prisoner's Dilemma game by the Maryland Flood and Melvin Dresser. And the second one is, we will also be looking to the theory of public goods by explaining, by actually emphasizing on the P.A. Samuelson's masterpiece, the pure theory of the public expenditure in which he actually proposed in 1954. And so, we will be talking about all these collective action theories in the next class itself. So, in the next class we will be talking about the emergence and evolution of these collective action theories by emphasizing on tragedy of the commons by Garrett Hardin, till the Eleanor Ostrom's the governing of commons by emphasizing on the case of institution itself in the governance part. So, that is what we will be discussing in the next class.